Happy Santo Nino Sunday to all of you, dear brothers and sisters. Once I was in a conversation with a family about a tragic event that happened in their neighborhood. This was in one of my former parishes, and I had just visited the family of one of the 4 children that had drowned. Nalunod sila in an abandoned quarry area. I visited to bless their dead 5-year-old son. I gathered from the conversation with the neighbors that the abandoned quarry area had become a pool of clear water during the rainy season, and that it attracted children to wade in. Hindi nila alam na malalim. Apparently, the boys had started out in a shallow part of the pond and then suddenly got alarmed when they found themselves in the deep part. Unfortunately, most of them did not know how to swim. Kaya, 4 ang namatay. In the middle of our conversation, a smart little boy who was about the same age as the victims came forward and started volunteering some of the details about the tragedy. He said he had personally witnessed what had happened. And since he was listening to the conversation and probably felt that his father's narration of the story was not very accurate, the boy interrupted and spoke up before me. And what followed next shocked me and rendered me speechless. Alam niyo ang ginawa ng ama? The father slapped the little boy in front of me. And he angrily said, "Didn't I tell you never to interrupt when the adults are in a conversation?" Mas pamilyar sa Tagalog. Hindi ko ba sinabi sa iyo na huwag kang sasabat-sabat sa usapan ng matatanda? And then the father looked up at me and even apologized to me for his son's behavior. Habang umiiyak yung anak niya out of embarrassment, I felt very awkward. And so I stood up to have myself excused. But I took the father aside. Kinausap ko ng sarilinan, and I told him that what he did was wrong. And if he could please console his son. Mabuti na lang makinig sa akin. I'm glad that he listened. You see, sometimes adults are not always right. Sometimes even adults have to learn to apologize to their children. On this feast day of the Santo Nino, our gospel reading is about Jesus calling his disciples' attention on how the adults should deal with children. The word that is used by Mark is, Jesus became indignant. Masyadong formal. In plain English, Jesus got angry. Nagalit siya. Madalang magalit si Jesus. And this is one of the occasions when he really got angry with his disciples. He reprimanded them. He reprimanded them for driving away the kids and preventing them from participating in the session. Listen to what he said. He said, "Let the children come to me. Do not prevent them. And then he said something that they never forgot. At hindi natin dapat makalimutan. The kingdom of God belongs to such as these. Have we ever considered how children tend to be left out in most of our church activities? Minsan narinig ko sa isang member ng Couples for Christ. Ang sabi niya, it took them quite a while before they realized that the kids in their families were getting left out from the parents' activities. And because of that, once they came up with a resolution to also organize Kids for Christ, Youth for Christ, hindi lang Couples for Christ. Parang the couples are busy and they forget that the kids are left out. I do not think Jesus was denying the fact that children actually have a lot of growing up to do and that they need the adults to mentor them, to guide them, to teach them. But sometimes, at the guise of disciplining or teaching the children a lesson, sometimes we don't realize that we might in fact be hindering their growth. And that is bound to happen, especially when our own growth into adulthood has been hindered by certain circumstances, like forms of physical abuse, or sexual abuse, or verbal abuse that may have traumatized us, or certain attitudes that we may have picked up from some dysfunctional adults. And I tell you, maraming adults who are dysfunctional. You see, not all people who have grown old have really grown up. Not all people who have grown old have really grown up. Even in Tagalog, mayroon tayong expression, tumandang paurong. And it applies to people who have regressed and not progressed with age. They have grown old, but they have not really grown up. And so, they cannot facilitate the growth of other people as well. Instead, they become a hindrance, nagiging hadlang. They become a hindrance to growth. And they can even become hazardous or toxic, especially when they are entrusted with authority. Na porket may edad, akala mo may tunay na otoridad. It doesn't always follow. Delikadong bigyan ng otoridad yung mga taong they only grew old but they didn't grow up. Remember what Jesus said about the scribes and the Pharisees. Parang magandang example ni Jesus. In Matthew chapter 23, ang sabi niya, woe to you! Woe to these scribes and Pharisees. Bakit? Because they tie up heavy burdens that are hard to carry and lay them on people's shoulders, but they will not lift a finger to move them. Parang you only make life miserable for other people. All their works, sabi niya, are performed in order to be seen. Mga insecure. They love to be positioned in places of honor. Na para bang pag inupo sa ibang lugar, ay bumaba ang dignidad. And they expect to be greeted in marketplaces, and they expect to be addressed properly according to their title, Rabbi, meaning good example of people who have grown old but have not grown up. That is why they tended to be very discriminatory towards people who did not meet up to their standards. You know, this was one of the most significant aspects in which Jesus differed from the Pharisees. Malaking pagkakaiba ng attitude ni Jesus at yung attitude ng mga Pariseo. Siguro, in modern parlance, we would say he was way ahead of his time. Because he went consciously against the culture of discrimination. And he knew how to even rub it in kapag kailangan in order to drive home his point. Especially when it had to do with the exclusion of certain people on the basis of sickness or illness like the lepers, a sickness like leprosy, or the exclusion of certain people on the basis of their disabilities, the blind, the deaf-mutes, and the lame, or on the basis of their means of livelihood, the tax collectors and the prostitutes, or on the basis of sex, like women, who were at that time mostly regarded as an inferior sex, or on the basis of age, like children. Alam niyo bang yung children, the child, wala pa siyang gender dun sa pangalan. They are only referred to as it. The child is, it is. But the basic message of Jesus is, we are all equal in dignity. Lahat tayo'y pantay-pantay sa dangal. And today happens to be also the feast of the baptism of the Lord in the universal calendar of the Roman Catholic Church. Dito lang sa Pilipinas, sineselebrate itong araw na ito, ang second Sunday in ordinary time, as Santo Nino Sunday. A few days ago, I remember giving you an assignment, which was to read 2 biblical passages that could help you understand kung bakit si John the Baptist, kung bakit si John the Baptist had chosen the River Jordan. Had chosen the River Jordan as his venue for his ritual of immersion for prospective members of his prophetic movement. I referred you first to the book of Joshua, chapter 3, which is about Israel's crossing of the Jordan before the birthing of their nationhood upon their entry to the Promised Land. And then secondly, I referred you to the second book of Kings, chapter 5. Yun bang kwento nung Syrian commander, Naaman, who sought to be prayed over and healed by the prophet Elisha. How he was instead told by the prophet na lumublob na lang daw siya sa tubig ng Ilog Jordan 7 times. Remember, I called your attention to that funny situation where this Syrian military officer almost walked out. Magbo-walk out na sana siya. Dahil feel niya, hindi siya binigyan ng importansya nung propeta. May dala-dala pa nga siyang endorsement letter from the king. At marami siyang dalang mga regalo bilang gantimpala kung sakaling mapagaling siya ng propeta. And now, nagalit siya. Magwo-walk out. Bakit? Kasi na-offend siya. He was starting to behave like a brat. Alam niyo yung English word, brat. Behaving like a brat. At sino yung nag-correct sa kanya for his bad attitude? Hindi matanda, kundi bata. In the story itself, there was a child, a slave girl from Israel. Siya ang kumausap sa kanyang amo. Naglakas loob tong batang to. Ang sabi niya, "Sir, ang layo ho ng nilakbay natin. Galing pa tayo ng Syria. Nandito na tayo sa Israel. Maliit na bagay lang naman ang hinihingi ng propeta na maligo kayo sa tubig ng Jordan River. Ano ho bang mawawala sa inyo kung sumunod kayo?" It was her way of asking, hindi kaya pwede na isang tabi muna ninyo ang ego. I remember the late Marilu Diaz-Abaya noong siya ang director namin sa aming talk show on the Sunday Gospel, Men of Light, and she was giving us an orientation about media work, media production. Ang sabi niya, mahirap gumawa ng media production kapag mayroong participants na may prima donna complex. Na para bang indispensable sila. Ang sabi niya, dapat we should be team players. But the important thing is, before you get in, you deposit your ego by the door. Bago ko pumasok, sabi, sa training na to, isang tabi muna, iwan mo yung ego mo dun sa may pintuan, ang sabi niya. The adult commander, Naaman, allowed himself to be corrected by the child. And so, lumublob na siya sa tubig ng ilog Jordan. And then, he suddenly found himself healed. Gumaling siya. And here is how the healing is described in the second book of Kings. His flesh became again like the flesh of a little child, and he was healed of his leprosy. Naging kutis sanggol. I find that very figurative. Siguro, hindi lang yan literal. Matalinghaga din. And I think this is what our baptism as Christians is supposed to mean. That we, in immersing ourselves in the waters of baptism, soak into the grace of God. And at the moment that we immerse into God's grace, we let go of that ego, that inner brat, that brat that only grows old but refuses to grow up. It is to emerge from the waters of death in order to breathe in the rejuvenating Spirit of God that alone can keep us young and youthful and childlike. Remember the affirmation that Jesus received from heaven. Paglabas daw niya sa tubig ng ilog Jordan, nahati daw ang langit. And the Spirit of God descended like a dove, and a voice was heard from heaven, the voice of the Father. At ganito yung sabi ng tinig, "You are my beloved Son. With you I am well pleased." Ikaw ang anak kong minamahal. Natutuwa ako sa iyo. Naliligayahan ako. I think this is what the Santo Nino is about. Hindi lang siya isang imahen. Hindi lang siya, estatwa that you will idolize. Ang mga icons sa atin are a theological statement. And when you look at an icon, you ask, what is the statement? It is a statement, not just about Christ, but about you, about us, about our calling to live the holy childhood of Christ, to be clothed with the dignity of being children of God. And I hope today you hear the same voice saying to you, ikaw ay minamahal kong anak. Natutuwa ako sa iyo. You are my beloved child. Let me end with something that sounds a bit sad. I have to confess to you that this is the saddest feast of Santo Nino that I have ever celebrated. Ito ang pinakamalungkot na piyestang Santo Nino pinagdiwang ko sa tanang buhay ko. Look around you. Who are missing? Sinong wala sa piling natin ngayon? The children. The pandemic has prevented our children from coming to church. In the same way that their elders, the senior citizens, are also hindered by strict regulations. And we are cooperating with this. But we're praying hard. Matapos na to. Are you not looking forward to another Santo Nino celebration? When there will be more children than adults inside the church. And they will come forward in order to be blessed. I miss that. Kaya sinasabi ko, malungkot ako ngayon. I look forward to a time when we will have our children again. And if you want to make me happy today, would you please do Jesus a little bit of a favor? Pag-uwi ninyo, please reach out to your children at home. Today, please, let them feel extra special. Let them feel how special they are to you. Baka bago kayo umuwi, kahit maliit na bagay lang, ibilin nyo sila. Kahit candy lang dyan. Something they'll be excited about. Alam naman natin, mababaw lang ang kaligayahan ng mga bata. Give them all your love and your care. And it doesn't even have to be a thing. You might want to spend time with them today. Tell them stories about your own childhood. Kung paano kayo nabuhay nung gyerang Hapon. Ay, hindi naman yata kayo ganyan katatanda, no? Tell them stories about your own childhood. And please, never hinder the children from coming to Jesus in order to discover their own mission in life.